impressed because we're, day 4 of a 4-day conference. So you're still here, so congratulations. This is impressive. There should be awards for staying till the end, right? So great. We're going to talk about your voice and how that helps with storytelling, both in writing and speaking. And this is a workshop. We are going to work. That's why I have you at tables. We are going to do stuff, and we're going to do stuff right away. So you came in, Jill is from Hallmark, and she's handing out tickets. So everyone should have a ticket. If you don't have a ticket, please raise your hand so Jill can come and provide you with a ticket. Let's make sure everyone has a ticket. Okay, and then you need a pen or a pencil, and you need paper. You need pen or pencil and a paper. So I've got some materials around. If you have your own, that's great. So on the back of your ticket should be a word or a phrase. Back of your ticket should be a word or a phrase. And Jill, I need one too. And make sure all the staff have one. Okay, great. Or maybe a picture. I have a picture on mine. So we are going to do a 5-minute writing sprint based on whatever is on your ticket. There are a few rules for this writing. One, there's no erasing, so you're just going to write, and you're going to write nonstop. So if you can't think of anything to write, just write A, B, C, D, E, F, G, just write the alphabet over and over until something comes to you based on whatever's on your ticket. Now, if anyone here is crying about what's on their ticket, you can raise your hand if you think you've been cursed. Jill will bring you a new ticket. I cannot promise a new ticket will be better than your current ticket, but you are welcome to get a new one. Everybody ready? So again, write your ABCs, and then write whatever comes to you. Again, this is whatever you think of based on the stimulus you have. That's it. That's it. So we're going to practice our writing. What we are working to do today is to help you find your true voice. Your true unique voice is your power to influence. But when you work in corporations, they beat your true voice out of you. Corporate speak is the opposite of your true voice. What you learn in school, academic speak, is the opposite of your true voice. Have you ever read a research article and thought you understood the personality of the person that wrote it? It's not there. But we lose our true voice in what we do much of every day in corporations. And so we're going to try to get that back. So I'm going to have to spark you in some different ways to hopefully get us closer. Okay, I am going to time us. I'm going to write, Jill's going to write, the staff's going to write, we're going to all write. So we're all ready? Yeah, got our hands loosened up. So I know some of you may still be skeptical because this is a room of researchers. I get that, room of researchers. And you've probably been hearing a lot of things about storytelling. One thing I can tell you that's maybe slightly different than me than other people talking about storytelling is I am a market researcher. I work on the client side. That is what I do. Just to give a little bit of brief introduction, I developed this particular workshop with Nancy Cox from Hallmark. She unfortunately has some medical issues and can't be here, but I am going to read her little bio that she wrote, and this is in her voice, not mine. So Nancy writes, "So I got you started writing right away with no introduction beyond what's in the brochure. That's because I am passionate about creating safe places for people's true voices. At Hallmark, I do that in research by creating research that has that space even in a survey. Often a verbatim in someone's voice is the start of an insight. Outside of Hallmark, I'm a published writer in literary journals, but also place publications such as Writer's Digest, Farm Woman News, and Quirks. I have edited everything from prescription kidney care cat food labels to thousands of greeting cards to a Harvard book on deep consumer understanding. I've written hundreds of research reports, including The Secret Life of Reindeer, and have taught leadership workshops with these same exercises, helping engineers, doctors, and even MBAs to find their voice." So Nancy comes from the writing side, and she brings us these writing exercises to help us get to our true voice. I, on the other hand, come from the speaking side of things. I grew up in rural Minnesota, and in rural Minnesota, you are, of course, yep, there's still a chair here, involved in 4-H, but I lived in town, and by town I meant 300 people, but I didn't have any cows to show. So my mother started me in public speaking competitions in 2nd grade, and I continued on from there all the way through high school, went on to do undergrad and graduate work in communication. I've taught public speaking at the collegiate level, so it's just a passion of mine, kind of the spoken word, and Nancy brings us the written word, but both of them have the same component, which is how do we get to our true voice and use that for influence. And sometimes to do that, we have to practice our craft. Professionals do this. If we think of Yo-Yo Ma, even as a child prodigy, still practices hours and hours a day. We sometimes have to practice our craft to continue to be good at it. Published writers write journals and lots of stuff that never gets published. So this is what we're doing today. We're taking a little bit of time to practice our craft. Okay, a couple of things I want to say about getting to your true voice. And I think this is one that actually I've heard in several of the other storytelling presentations. It's really simple, and it really is the most important thing. It's about be yourself. Your mom is right. She's always been right. You should just be yourself. You have to be you, and that's what's going to help you be the most influential. Have to be yourself. So aren't we always ourselves? Because you have to be brave to be yourself. It's scary. The most important stories we tell are the stories about ourselves. They're our own stories, which means we have to be vulnerable to share those stories. And that can be scary to be vulnerable. But this is the beginning of influence. When we're vulnerable, we say to other people, I am willing to share my story with you. And this causes them to say, I can feel safe sharing my story back. I can feel safe sharing my business problem back. This is the beginning of trust and connection, which is the foundation for that influence we're trying to do in our organizations. So be yourself, be brave. The other thing I would encourage is to be passionate. So perfect and impassionate is often boring. But if you're passionate, even if you're imperfect, that can be pretty exciting. So we're not worried about perfection here. It's not get every technique right. It's about being yourself and being passionate about the stories that you tell. So, for the researchers in the room, why do we have embroidery thread on the table? We could do that later, but that's not quite the next thing. Oh, good thought. No, but good thought. Here is a prop, and why do we use props? Why in research do we give respondents stimulus to respond to? Inspiration. To engage them. Sometimes we get more specific feedback if we give them something more specific to respond to. So this is the same thing with writing or practicing our craft, having a word, or in this case, we're going to use colors. So for our next writing exercise, I want you to choose a piece of embroidery thread, and we're going to write about the color on that embroidery thread. A few things. If right now you just wrote, raise your hand if you wrote. If you did this exercise and you wrote, raise your hand. You are a writer. You are a writer. A writer is someone who writes. We are all writers. And sometimes we forget that. We are all writers. Have you ever had a conversation with a friend or a family member? Raise your hand if you've ever had a conversation with a friend or a family member. You are speakers. You are storytellers. These are things, that's it. That's it. You are a storyteller, you are a speaker. If you can have a conversation at the kitchen table with a friend, you're a storyteller. We already do this in our lives. It's just how do we bring some of those same skills into what we do at work. A few things, if Nancy was here, that she would want to share with you about getting to your true voice. One is practice. That's why we do these exercises. It's to practice. Professionals have to practice. Another thing great writers tend to do is they tend to be great observers. And I think this is really something writers and market researchers have in common, this power of observation. For those of us that spend more time doing qualitative, that's a really important part of what we do. And great writers tend to spend a lot of time observing. The reason Nancy has us write by hand, for those of you that are parents, did your babies learn to crawl first or to speak? Crawl. Often they learn to crawl first. What science is showing us, and I've heard from people who went to the Cirque Du Soleil presentation, but unfortunately I missed that, movement stimulates different parts of our brain. Writing by hand helps to stimulate parts of your brain to get those creative thoughts going for your writing. That's why we had you writing by hand. That's why I asked you to write your ABCs if you couldn't think of something. That movement helps to stimulate your thoughts versus just kind of sitting there not doing anything with your hands. So that's why we wanted to do those things. How do we know when someone's gotten to their true voice? If you've ever been in a meeting room and all of a sudden someone gets up and they shut the door and they go, look, I want to speak really candidly right now. Now you know something good's really going to happen. Like, it's going to be interesting, right? It's going to be interesting. If someone's got this 10 million PowerPoint slides that they're going through and finally they decide to say, you know what, I'm just going to tell you what I think and stop, reading these slides to you. It's probably going to get a lot more interesting. When you're at that kitchen table talking to friends and family, that's where you hear true voice. And if you think back to that kitchen table when you were a child with your parents, that's your true voice. That's about who you are. And I think with some of the stories we heard today, we got a glimpse into who people are through the stories, how they talk. When you write, if you can write how you think and talk, it's going to be more truly you. It also helps to read it out loud. So we had you read out loud. If you're ever doing a presentation and you say it out loud, you're going to know when it doesn't sound right. When you're reading it, you don't notice it. And the moment you say it out loud, you're like, that's awkward. That's weird. I wouldn't really ever talk like that. And you'll know because you won't want to say it the way you wrote it. So those are kind of tips to help you get to that voice that's your voice. I want to take some inspiration for our work from the storytelling cross. Yes, absolutely.
That writing stimulates by hand. What about typing versus writing? Is it a different stimulation?
I would think it is. I don't have Nancy here since the writing part's a little more her expertise. But my understanding is yes, and I know from some folks who went to the Cirque du Soleil, they talked about the importance of very different movements, stimulating different parts of your brain. And so they were even pushing, to my understanding, to suggest you move in ways you would never move before because it unlocks different thoughts. So I think there is something literally to the writing. I think in the case where if we're trying to spend some time getting away from corporate voice, getting away from the computer probably also helps us do that too. And what I'd say to any of you for anything you hear today and anything you hear at any of this conference, you take what works for you and use that. And anything I say that you don't like, you can discard it. I don't know what you kept or discarded. You take what works for you. So some storytelling tricks of the trade, I think, to give us some inspiration as we think about what we do as market researchers. So if we think about from our friends in journalism, they talk about don't bury the lead. What as market researchers, what does that mean for us? Get to the main point first. I don't know about you, I've had business partners where they may have stopped listening after the first point, so if you didn't get to the most important thing, maybe you've lost them. Yet how many research reports start with methodology? How many business partners care about the details of methodology? Some, not all, some not at all. From the fiction trade, the maxim of the fiction trade is show, don't tell. Show, don't tell. This is what fiction writers live by. How does that help us in market research? Visuals might help. What else? Show, don't tell. Is this when we bring in consumer quotes? Maybe video? Versus to just say, here's the recommendation, go do this. They might want to see some reasons behind that. Showing can be very important. People don't get as excited sometimes when you just tell them stuff. That's why we talk about story today. When you tell, you create resistance. It's a push strategy, and some people, by the nature of their personalities, Even if you're right and they know you're right, they will push back, because that's what that creates. When we tell stories, it's a pull strategy. Stories are very respectful of your audience because stories say you can come to this and bring your own wisdom. And you can choose to bring it or not, but there's no push-pull, there's no fight. So stories are kind of beautiful in that way. I go to story workshops all the time because it's a passion of mine, but many of them are presented by people who are coming out of storytelling backgrounds and they're not actually market researchers. So the principles that they're bringing, the things that they're suggesting to you, again, that's why I say pull the pieces that will work for you, because they aren't necessarily quite in the situations that we're in. And even if they are working in corporations, when they say they're kind of coaching executives, they're coaching executives to do your huge town hall up on a stage. They're not working with that presentation with 5 to 20 business partners in one room where you're trying to kind of get them from point A to point B on a business decision. Yep, no problem. No problem. Okay. So good conversation, and thank you for sharing. Again, this is a workshop, so we're here to all learn from each other, so I'm learning things too, so thank you to all of you. Another kind of storytelling tip, this is from Stephen King, because we should all get storytelling tips from Stephen King. Kill your darlings. Kill your darlings. What would that mean for us as market researchers? Maybe there might be pieces there to kill, so we edit. Sometimes there is a sub-story that we love in the data because it's really interesting, but maybe it's not the main point. Sometimes maybe we need to let that go. So less does not equal lazy. Sometimes as market researchers, we tend to be academic overachievers as a profession. And it can be okay to let some of that go. I also want to encourage you to edit out loud when you're giving a presentation. And this is really, really difficult. The moment you have it on a slide, you want to talk about it. You want to talk about it. Even though you know that no one is listening to you right now and everyone is bored and you should go on to your next point, you are still compelled to talk about it because it's on the slide. And you've all been in, if you feel like it's not you, then that's fine. You've all been in presentations where someone talks. The moment someone says they're not going to drain a slide, what are they going to do? Talk about every single point on that slide while you slowly wish you could be somewhere else. So this is a real challenge, but I would really encourage you, if the audience has stopped listening, they don't seem to be paying attention, just go on, don't make your points, move on. The worst that will happen is someone's gonna go, hey, can you go back? Okay. Score. Now they wanna know. Now they wanna know. So I would just encourage you to try that, but it is hard. It is hard. Okay, where are we on time? Okay, so we're going to do another little exercise. So what I want you to do is to find a partner. Just someone sitting next to you is fine, or if some people need to move around. We're just going to each tell a short story. So you're each going to have about 2 minutes to tell a short story. I would suggest if you have a project from work that you can talk about publicly, then tell a short story about that. If you don't, just tell a short story about your favorite session or least favorite session here at TMRE. So you're just going to tell a short story about either of those. So we've got something in mind, and I will time for us. Fiction. So the University of Florida, which has a top creative writing program, actually has an entire graduate level course on short stories, 250 words or less. And if you read out there in terms of flash fiction, there are also folks that will do 6-word stories. Some of you have heard those. So I'm a Firefly Joss Whedon fan. Some of you might be Buffy the Vampire Slayer fans. That's okay too. So he's one of my favorite 6-word stories. Gown removed carelessly, head less so. It's a pretty powerful 6-word story. Dave Eggers has one of my other favorite 6-word stories. Found true love, married someone else. So people can do full stories in 6 words. So that's pretty interesting. There is power in one-sentence stories. And I say this because human beings have been using one-sentence stories effectively for storytelling forever and ever and ever. We all know a ton of one-sentence stories. You can probably finish them for me. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? The early bird. A picture's worth. These one-sentence stories are really powerful. We remember them. Does anyone have any personal kind of one-sentence stories that you heard growing up that you then teach your children? So I think where this helps us, as I think about corporations, so we always kind of hear about the elevator speech. I've really never given an elevator speech. Currently, I work at a company in an office building that we share with many other companies, so we would probably be out of our, NDA to like share a story in the elevator with people from other companies, right? That's not going to happen. But sometimes when I go to get my tea, or I'm at the copier, sometimes I run across a colleague, and I've got just a second to kind of say, hey, I've been working on this about this that you might really care about. There are times you have that opportunity to share that one sentence to get someone excited about something that you're doing. And I think it's important for every piece of research that we do. You've got your full story, you've got your big deck. Do you have your 5-minute version for if, great, we had an hour scheduled to hear about you, but now we have a business emergency and we're going to talk about that instead of your topic. And then, oh, here's your 5 minutes to quick share everything you learned. Or do you have that kind of one-sentence version? And I think we need all of these as market researchers as we talk about those different audiences. So I'd like you to work with your partners for a little bit here and come up with a one-sentence version for each of your stories. That's the one-sentence version for each of your stories. And you can collaborate together to come up with this. If we think about kind of presenting out loud or kind of developing your stories, a few little tricks or things that I would share that I find useful. One, which you've probably seen in some other things, is when they talk about storyboarding. I do also strongly believe in using 3x5 cards for storyboarding. I really believe in, again, writing by hand. Don't start in PowerPoint. So there's some great reasons to kind of do this, to kind of draw out all your stories. What are the points you want to make? What are the things you want to talk about? The reason I really like using note cards and I really like writing in hand before you move into PowerPoint is it's really easy to reorder, to change the flow. It's really easy to get rid of this. When you've spent time building a slide in PowerPoint, deleting it's really painful. Yes, it's much easier to kill your darlings here than when you've spent a lot of time into them. So this is kind of a quick, dirty way to help you kind of better get to that story. Often, when I can afford to, I'll kind of storyboard it out and then kind of let it sit for a day and then come back to it and say, really, does this the kind of the flow? Is this what really makes sense? So sometimes the really down and dirty, cheap tools can be really helpful to kind of get you to that story. Before you have a big presentation, I also really recommend that you rehearse out loud. And here's the thing, you do not have to force your family members or friends to listen to you. If they're that good of family and friends, that's great. But just even saying it out loud in a room by yourself, when you say it out loud, you'll hear where it doesn't flow. You'll hear where it doesn't quite make sense, where it doesn't quite connect, and then you can make those changes. No matter how much time I do this, every time I say things out loud, it's different than whatever you wrote. You're like, ooh, that doesn't sound quite right. So it's just a really good tip to say it out loud if that's where you're eventually going to be presenting it. The other things I'd say about presenting, so it's kind of all, we're going to take a deep breath in. Ready? Deep breath out. That's probably the number one thing people forget when they're presenting, is to breathe. Take a big breath. And silence is okay. You can use silence. Especially if you have a great consumer quote up on that screen, don't read it. Your audience can all read. Let them read it. I realize you might, depending, but let them read it. Have some silence. This kind of mixes things up, gets people's attention. Okay, so I know some of you are probably still saying, how does this have anything to do with what I do? Why are we here? From my perspective, I think the thing that can be a challenge for us as market researchers is The skills for getting the answer and the skills for telling others are two different skills. And as market researchers, we spend a lot of time and training on those skills for getting the answer. We're really good at that. We spend a lot of time on that. Sometimes we also need to balance that out with spending time on skills for telling others. So that's kind of what you've taken time here with me to do today, so I appreciate that from all of you. What Nancy often tells students when she does a version of this workshop, this is kind of the V for your value. So on this side over here is what's on your resume, what's on your LinkedIn profile. It's your experience, it's your skills. Maybe you are an expert at Tableau, or you're a moderator, you like SPSS, whatever great skills you have over here. So that's your resume. So over here is your influence. So this might be your network. This might be your listening skills. This might be your writing skills in email, in PowerPoint, in whatever you're writing. This might be your speaking skills. And if you've got all of these skills, but that's it, over here on your resume, this is your value to your company. But when you have a mix of these skills, even though maybe your resume skills are less, or maybe you're here, then this becomes the volume of your value to your company. So we just really kind of recommend that you're balancing out those skills to have a greater volume of value for your company. Often when companies are looking to promote, they're looking for both, right? They're looking for people who have influence in the company. And there are lots of things that go into that, not just the things we're talking about today, but certainly part of what we're talking about today. So that is kind of one way to think about why maybe it is worth my time to spend some time on the craft of these things, even though at first maybe some of the exercises you're like, I don't know, how does that relate? The other thing, we talked about kind of data, facts and data. There was a Quarks audience poll from 2015, and I think we see the same in the GRIT report now. One of the top skills for new hires people are looking for is the ability to use data and tell stories with data. It's a top thing that people are looking for. So we think about, this is the challenging thing though, is stories live, facts die. Stories live, facts die. I'm probably not the only one, but who's had this happen in their company? You've got a sales result, good or bad. Someone at a high enough leadership position spouts out a reason for the sales result. This reason is based on their own personal belief with no data whatsoever. It has become the lore at your entire company. You have data that proves this idea wrong every which way till Tuesday. How hard is it to kill that story? It can be very, very hard, because stories live and facts die. As researchers, we have the facts, and we want those facts to be important in our businesses, but sometimes we need the story to help them. And if you don't believe that stories live and facts die, you've clearly not been watching the election lately, right? Stories live, facts die. So an interesting thing, if we think about spinach. Popeye made spinach really famous, and what did Popeye tell us about spinach? Really good, it makes you strong, has lots of iron. No. There was kind of a decimal error in another century. Turns out it doesn't really help that much with that. Does it matter? Nope. Stories live, facts die. So I think this is one of our challenges as researchers, is how do we marry the two of those together? How do we add the story to help our facts be more powerful? So a couple of things, I guess, before we go, but does anyone else have other comments, other things that they want to share? I do have, if you want, this will be available after the presentation as well from Team RE, but here's handouts with notes from everything I talked about. So you are welcome to take that with you. So just, first of all, if anyone wants embroidery thread that they would like to take home, I don't want you to feel like you are very welcome to embroidery thread. Did you have a comment you wanted to share?
I just had a question. Like, do you have any preferred resources for sort of like quick prompts like we did earlier? Like where to find more of those?
The storytelling prompts, or what do you mean?
Yeah, like one was like, pick up something that's a certain color and write about that color. And one is like,
So the back of the handout has the 2 writing exercises for you. And Nancy and I have also put together our book recommendation list for writing and speaking as well. So that's a starting point. My business cards are on the table. You're welcome to chat with me further about this topic. We still have a little bit of time, so we can still chat, but I just want to make sure you have the things that you need. Again, take what you want to take. So again, like all things, the real story is really simple. You are a writer, you are a storyteller, and be you. So thank you all so much.